Welcome back to the MOOC course titled Qualitative Research Methods. My name is Aradhana Malik and I am helping you with this course. We have discussed what qualitative research is, how quantitative and qualitative research are different. We have also talked about what qualitative research entails. So how do you conduct qualitative research? Today we will talk about the paradigms. We'll get started on the paradigms of qualitative research, and the first paradigm that I would like to introduce you to is the interpretivist paradigm in qualitative research. So the approaches to human inquiry, how do we study human behavior from the different mindsets, and how do we approach human behavior from different perspectives. So we will talk about the constructivist, interpretivist approaches to human inquiry, and this is from a book by Schwant. This is from an article by Schwant that appeared in the book titled Qualitative Research Methods, the Handbook of Qualitative Research Methods that I told you about right in the beginning of the course. Okay, so what does a constructivist or interpretivist do? The constructivist or interpretivist believes that to understand this world of meaning, one must interpret it. So the constructivist or interpretivist does not take things at face value. The constructivist or interpretivist situates whatever is being studied in the context, interprets it within that context. The inquirer must elucidate the process of meaning construction and clarify what and how meanings are embodied in the language and actions of social actors. We are studying human behavior, we are studying environments. Now, how do we make meaning out of a situation is what the interpretivist and the constructivist does. The constructivist or the interpretivist studies how do we arrive at particular meanings of the things that we study. Why do I assign a specific meaning to something that I am studying? For example, the definition of professionalism. How do we arrive at what it means to be professional? How do we define professionalism in specific contexts? Maybe in the Western context, professionalism is defined in a certain way. In the Eastern or more community-oriented cultures, professionalism is defined in a different manner. So how do we define different situations? How do we study different situations? If I want to study human behavior in educational settings, the behavior of students in classrooms, for example, how do I decide what is normal? How do I decide what is appropriate? How do I make meaning of what the students do in the classroom, and how do I decide where to draw the line between normal and not so normal, or unique and general? So where do I draw that line, and how do I come to those meanings? How do I situate those meanings? How do I connect what I see in the environment to the environment that I see it in? What is the process that goes behind my understanding how whatever I am studying is related to the environment it is situated in, is what interpretivists and constructivists do. Okay. Interpretivist thinking. The challenges in interpretivist thinking are obviously, number one challenge is objectivity. The way inquirer A interprets something is very different from the way inquirer B interprets the same thing within the same context. So objectivity is a big challenge. The second challenge is, how does one study the subjective human experience and still, in quotes, avoid the subjectivity and error of naive inquiry through the judicious use of a method? So how do we decide, how do we remain objective and still study the Or how do we avoid subjectivity, multiple interpretations, too many how do we avoid subjectivity, and how do we remove the errors of naive inquiry, which means unstandardized inquiry, which means the starting out naive is somebody who doesn't know whatever, or who doesn't know enough about a situation, somebody who's new to a situation, and in that newness to a situation makes some mistakes. So how do we remove that naivete of inquiry and still remain objective? How do we remove these multiple interpretations, and what kinds of methods will we use? And so that is, how do we remain objective? How do we study whatever we are studying and still and how do we study things qualitatively and still remain objective? And that is a big challenge here. We do not simply live out our lives in time and through language, rather we are our history. So we are not living, we are not outside of the context that we are studying. We are within the context, and we are studying the context as we are experiencing it. We are creating history by virtue of being within the context. So we are defining, the context is enriched by our presence within it as inquirers as well, and we are studying the same context that we are a part of. And going back to this, we are not, we are not simply living whatever we are studying. We are creating history by being within the context, by using the language that we are using. The fact that language and history are both the condition and the limit of understanding is what makes the process of meaning construction hermeneutical. Now, hermeneutics is the art and theory and philosophy of the interpretation of meaning of an object. So how do we interpret meaning? The philosophy behind interpretation of meaning is called hermeneutics. And then we go back to this, the fact that language and history are both the condition of understanding. We need a language to understand the context we are in, but language also limits how we understand it. Language, on the one hand, gives us a tool to understand the context we are in. On the other hand, it limits how we understand the context. My favorite example for this is describing snowfall. I belong to the mountains in India, in northern India, so I have experienced snowfall in a variety of ways. But I have colleagues here who have only seen snowfall in movies. West Bengal is a cold region, despite the sweater that I am wearing here. This room is very cold and winter is creeping in. This place, West Bengal, is a very cold, is a very warm region. So people here have not seen snow falling. Occasionally, very rarely, they may see hailstones, but they have not experienced snowfall. Now, those of us who have seen snow falling have various definitions for it. Even in Himachal Pradesh, we have 3 or 4 names for different types of snow. We have snow, we have large flakes, we have small flakes, we have sleet, which is a mixture of snow and very tiny hailstones and rain. We have what we call in the local language as bajri, which is very tiny stone-like solid snowflakes. They are not hailstones, they are something between snowflakes and hailstones. So language, I am giving you all these examples because I want you to, I want to facilitate your understanding of how language gives us an opportunity to experience whatever we are experiencing. Now, on the one hand, language gives us so many things. On the other hand, if I see a different kind of snow for which I have never heard of a name, I will not know how to describe it. So language also limits our understanding of whatever we experience. If I am in a new situation, I will not know how to describe it because I don't have the words for it. So language becomes a limiter. It is also a facilitator and it is also a limiter. And language facilitates our understanding of the phenomena that we experience, of the phenomena that we study. And the philosophy behind understanding the phenomena that we are studying is called hermeneutics. Okay, how do we make meaning of the situation that we are trying to study? What are we trying to understand? Why are we trying to understand it by method A, or why not by method B? What are the parameters that we are using to understand whatever we are understanding? What is the basis of this understanding? If I am trying to classify, or if I am trying to explain sleet to somebody here in Kharagpur, and I say it's a mixture of snowflakes and very tiny hailstones and rain, and they'll say, well, it all comes from the sky. So what is the difference between snowflakes and hailstones? If they are coming at the same time, are there 3 different clouds at 3 different locations? I don't know. But it's very difficult for me to explain the concept of a snowflake to somebody who has never seen a snowflake. So it limits their understanding. So I have to tie it with something they understand. So I'll tell them, okay, you've seen hailstones, shrink the hailstones, make them very tiny, and then make them light and fluffy. And so if I show them how water expands to such an extent after cooling down, after freezing, that it becomes very light as cotton, or maybe light as air, then it becomes a snowflake, and there are these tiny patterns, and it's very difficult for me to explain these things to them unless I tie it with something that people already know. And that is what we are talking about here, interpretivist. From my perspective as a person who has experienced snow, the way I interpret and explain snow will be very different from a person who has read about snow but never experienced it. And that interpretation will be very different from the interpretation of a person who has only read about snow, who understands the science behind how snow is formed but has never experienced it. And that will be very different from the interpretation of a person who has seen snowflakes, enough of snowflakes on television or through various media, but has never read about the science behind how snow is formed. So, we all have different interpretations, and that is one big challenge. How do we bring these interpretations? What is the logic we are using to understand these, to create these interpretations and to understand the phenomena that we are trying to understand? That is what an interpretivist does. Okay, the fourth challenge here is maintenance of the uniqueness of human inquiry. Explanation versus understanding. Explanation is scientific inquiry. Why do things happen the way they happen? So scientific inquiry, there is description. Hermeneutics is the philosophy behind the why. It goes one step back. So the parameters that we are using to understand a phenomenon are also based in a context. Why are we choosing X parameters and not Y parameters? The uniqueness of what we are trying to understand situated in a more generalized context. Where do we draw the line between a generalized context and the uniqueness of what we are trying to understand? How do we separate out the two? Where do we say, okay, this is what can be quantified and this is what cannot be quantified so far, so this will have to be dealt with through a qualitative description? How do we connect this qualitative description and situate it into the quantified understanding of a situation is what interpretivists deal with, and that's a big challenge. Where do we say, okay, we've quantified something enough, we still have not understood this much part of it, now we need to move on and we need to figure out how we can describe this unexplained part in such a way that it connects to the quantified whole. Okay. the responses to these challenges are: the first one is a synthesis between social realism, depiction of real life through art form, primarily painting, and constructivism, how it is represented and perceived by people who are affected by it. So one response to what we are doing here is realism, a combination, a balance between depicting things as they are and situating the interpretation within the context from which we have extracted out this unique piece that we want to study, for want of a better word. This unique phenomenon, the uniqueness of the phenomenon, or the uniqueness of the specific aspect of a specific phenomenon that we are trying to study. And we create a balance. We say, here it is, please interpret it any way you want. No, that's not what we say. We just put it out and we say, okay, this is what it looks like, and this is how we are going to interpret it, and here is why. So we draw balance between these two. The use of well-defined methods. There are methods of qualitative inquiry that are well-defined, that are defended, proven over time. So we use well-defined methods to eliminate error. Number one, the first reason why we use methods is to eliminate error. The second reason is to avoid the subjectivity and error of naive inquiry. The third response is to deny the opposition of subjectivity and objectivity and overcome it by fully accepting the hermeneutical character of existence. So we say subjectivity and objectivity are not opposing each other, they are connected. And they are connected in and through hermeneutics. Hermeneutics, or the hermeneutical character of existence, is what connects the objective, the quantifiable, verifiable, objective view of understanding something, and the subjective explanation or interpretation that we have formed about the unique portions that cannot be quantified. So that bridge is created in and through hermeneutics. Okay. The third interpretivist position assumes that the defining characteristic of an ontological hermeneutics is that linguisticality and historicality are constitutive of being human, which means we do not simply live out our lives in time and through language. This is what I was saying, that we are situated within time and we are creating history through language. We are creating our own history through language. We are part of the history that we are studying. The fact that language and history are both the condition and the limit of understanding is what makes the process of meaning construction hermeneutical. So the connection between language as a limiter and a facilitator is what makes this whole process hermeneutical. Once we understand that a balance has to be achieved, that's when we start looking at things the way they are. We situate them in different contexts, in specific contexts, and we study them within the context as unique aspects of the contexts they are situated in. So we get a thorough understanding of the context the phenomena we are studying are situated in, and the uniqueness of the phenomena that we are studying. Okay, all this sounds very difficult, but hopefully it will become more and more understandable as we go along. So that is all we have time for in this lecture. We will continue with more on interpretivist thinking in the next session. Thank you very much for listening.